All right, we're kicking off Digital Wildcatters. First of all, I want to say that we have a birthday among one of our founders. It's his birthday tomorrow. Our founders. Are we employees?
BDE founders or
No. Digital Wildcatters founder. It's Frack Slap's birthday tomorrow.
Yeah.
He bailed on us and decided to go on a trip to New York instead.
Is he doing it for personal reasons or is it business?
I have no clue why they're up there, to be honest with you. But
All right, I have a bone to pick. As Houstonians, this is a Houstonian bone to pick.
There's a lot of those.
Why is the Tennessee Titans showing up in Oilers uniforms?
Man, that
Because they can.
pisses me off so much every single time.
It makes me so mad. I mean, it's worse than the Down Horns.
For
me.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I was born here, and when we left, when we left, and when I was in elementary school, we moved to Memphis with the Titans, who became the
Memphis
Oilers.
First.
They were the Tennessee Oilers their first year
Yes.
while they were building the stadium, and they played in Memphis.
Liberty Bowl.
Yep, they played in the Liberty Bowl that had no business hosting, and still doesn't, an NFL team. But and then they, finally moved to Nashville and stuff. And it's like I've never, it's purely out of spite that the owner held onto those rights and all of that stuff and continues to sit on them, in my opinion. I mean, there's business at that as well, right? Like all the licensing that comes with the Oilers stuff.
Right.
And I guarantee you Oilers stuff probably sells just as well as the Titan stuff and the Texan stuff does by itself, just because of the throwback.
I'm old enough to remember at the end of the Oilers era in Houston, you remember the canceled preseason game because the Astrodome turf was so bad. They literally stopped a game in the middle and canceled the remainder of the game. But brutal. I will say, I almost tweeted out last night, for those of you on DirecTV, you're not able to get CBS because they're having an ongoing dispute with Tegna. So not only did the iconic Oilers not make an appearance, of course you can see it streaming on Paramount Plus, but that Paramount Plus, you got to have Paramount Plus with the Showtime package. Mm-hmm. No thanks. Missed Willie Nelson's 90th birthday broadcast as well.
Yes, that's correct.
So 2 Texas icons yesterday were broadcast on CBS and got to see neither of them.
Well, I think there's a couple things that we learned yesterday.
I mean, DirecTV
what did we learn?
Texas.
We learned that if you show up and play the Texans with Oilers outfits, you're going to lose.
That was delicious.
It was.
And secondly, if you're going to throw the down horns against the Lady Longhorns, they're going to beat you. They're going to sweep you. So congratulations to the University of Texas Lady Longhorns, who won the national championship in volleyball.
Can't you just be happy with being in the CFP?
I know.
Hey, as someone said, a buddy of mine said to me, he says, hey, take this victory lap while you can, because you'll be the next 10 years will be 10 years of 6 and 5 seasons in the SEC. I was
one last funny thing in the Oilers saga, or the rights, JJ Watt tweeted out yesterday, we win, we get it back. Those are the rules. Sorry, not sorry.
They should do that.
Well, we got some real energy news now, I think. Stuff's going on.
A lot of stuff's going on.
What do you want to kick off with, Mark? What's bothering you the most about the world of energy?
It's not bothering. It's just kind of geopolitical reality. And I think the biggest headline related to it is BP announcing they are ceasing tanker traffic through the Red Sea, which has become somewhat of a problem area for both tankers and container ships, with the Houthis being aggressive and essentially hijacking container ships and harassing traffic in that area. Has become a pretty significant security situation. Just a quick reminder, the Houthis are the Yemen-based rebel group aligned with Iran, mostly Shia, although the organizational and the population structure is a lot more complex. They've been together and a bit of a burr in Yemen and Saudi Arabia's side since the early mid-90s. If you recall, some of the drone attacks in Saudi Arabia damaged the facilities, et cetera. So BP is, I think, the first crude and product shipper to announce that they're going to not traverse the Red Sea. They will monitor it and then adjust accordingly. Crude's up a couple of bucks this morning to WTI is almost 74 last I looked. So just some numbers on what it means for the amount of maritime crude natural gas traffic in the form of LNG. It's about 12% of global maritime crude transport and about 8% of global LNG, a lot of which is going to North America and Europe.
That's significant. I mean, as we said, we're on the verge. If this winter actually becomes cold AF, a lot of people are screwed.
Yeah. I mean, the geopolitical stuff is just one of those unknowns that no one thinks about until it's there. And you're like, oh shit, we can't ship crude. Because that significantly changes routes if people stop going through there, right? Like,
yeah, I forget who it was, announced that I guess they had gotten approval to peel off and go around the Cape, southern part of Africa. So I think, like with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and global crude movements, we will see some adjustment. You were talking about it, or conjecturing earlier about, do some of the private players take up the slack and figure out ways to maneuver traffic through that area to take up the slack. It's just, it doesn't adjust overnight.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading this article this morning about Gunvor and how they anticipated that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and they had some long-term contracts for LNG that were a lot cheaper than if gas prices spiked. So they figured out, well, shit, we need to get out from underneath these contracts. Who do we screw first? So they actually cut off supply to Pakistan. And what was 5 shipments equated to about $200 million worth of natural gas, LNG. Well, they turned around and sold it for $600 million. So that covers their legal fees because Pakistan's pissed. But what's interesting is I was playing golf yesterday with a guy that works for one of these Swiss-based commodity firms. He's one of their sort of top traders. They love the volatility. Mm-hmm. It's interesting in a world where we're like, man, this is a big news about BP stopping shipments around through the Red Sea. These private commodity traders, they love this shit.
Mm-hmm. So if putting in a bit of a plug for Javier Blas with Bloomberg co-wrote a book called The World for Sale, and it's all about the world of commodity trading and the personality of exactly what you were just talking about. Let's just say it's an intrepid bunch that has a different risk calculus than.
I would have to say that it was
some of the corporate players.
Pros versus the Joes yesterday. It was me and another guy. We're the pros, because we're our handicaps, and we played these guys. One of them on the other side was this trader, not as good of a golfer, but when it came time for pressure, and there was some cash, a lot of cash, totally deadly.
Nice.
I was so upset, but I was like, of course.
Yeah.
It's a 210-yard par 3. He stripes it to 3 feet. I'm like, that's impossible unless you're really good at handling stress and pressure like this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the crazy part, I took a commodities trading class when I was getting my master's. So I started watching just US-based commodities mostly then. But, the crazy part about commodities trading is a lot of the actual, I think my professor even said this, it's like something like 90% of the contracts never get filled, which is like incredibly ironic considering the fact that they opened up global commodity trading so that you would have a true world market and for people actually trading the commodity. And now it's gone back the other way to where, okay, well, there's no single person that controls the price or the supply of something, but the algorithms and the traders can control the volatility, or, you've got these like waterfall effects when it starts going up or down, regardless of even what commodity it is really, right? Like they just trigger those kind of like, oh shit, you've got all this automatic trading happening and then prices just fall for no reason.
Something happens, it changes, prices are going to spike, long-term contracts become negotiation points, right?
Right. Yeah, but
it's actually
hard to make money without volatility. A lot of times,
volatility.
Too.
You need it, and we have a lot of.
Well, even the equity side of it's been described now by someone who's been in it a long time, Arjun Murthy. He doesn't talk about the super cycle; he talks about super vol, and I think that is the appropriate way to think about the backdrop of all this that's commodity related both on the commodity and the equity side. So in other matters, crude. On the flip side, Goldman took down its 2024 Brent forecast by about $10, which is not trivial on a prior kind of point forecast for 2024 of 92. They're now saying 80 to 81 is the average, with a range of 70 to 90. And that headline in Reuters was on the basis of what we've been talking about here lately, and that is surprising to the upside is U.S. production. Now expecting growth of around 900,000 barrels a day, a number that's, I think, been out there a while, but they, I guess, made it official.
Yeah.
And so I just find it interesting that this coincides with, we've got a little upset going on geopolitically, which is actually doing what geopolitical events used to do, which is drive crude higher.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how long that lasts. They do say in that note that they do not expect, in fact, they expect Saudis to hold the base level of cuts through 2025 and these additional cuts through at least the fourth quarter of this year. So don't expect the Saudis to flush the market.
So basically what you're saying is, with all the volatility going on, you've still got Russia, Ukraine, you've got the Yemenis creating some stress. You would think prices go up, but prices are now forecasted to go down. Now, this is Goldman Sachs. Others could think otherwise, because U.S. is stepping up production.
Well, that's, we're seeing kind of an organic creep if in U.S. production, because there is no explicit coordination. It's just
right.
A concerted effort by dozens and dozens and dozens of players in the U.S. market, high grading, doing better, more efficient job of drilling and completion, and we're seeing the effects of that. How long that lasts?
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Do you know, like, of that new projected or current crude, how much of that is onshore, offshore, unconventional versus conventional, by any chance?
I think it's predominantly unconventional, but I don't recall or have not seen that breakdown. It's predominantly unconventional and predominantly Permian.
I'd be curious, I bring that up just because I'd be curious to see what some of the major players do with, a lot of their bigger offshore stuff now that prices seem to kind of have a pseudo floor here in that 70 to 80 range.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing other pressure points to the upside in terms of production growth that are routinely cited along with U.S. production growth in both Guyana and Brazil. So if we've put a $70 floor under crude, does that change the long term?
Right.
Because those are long cycle by definition. It remains to be seen. I think both Chevron, or particularly Exxon, and others taking on more short cycle gives them a bit more of a toggle, capex year to capex year.
I mean, I'm thinking about leasing some dirt in the Permian. What do you think?
You and everybody else.
Am I late?
Maybe.
Got $30 billion. You can just buy it.
I was going to say.
I could do that.
Be perfect time for a major.
I'm an entrepreneur. I want to do everything myself,
So let's stay on fossil fuels and hydrocarbons. And this was actually nailed down and signed after last week's show. And we don't want to spend too much more time on it, but COP28 ended with, I believe, 196 countries agreeing to the language, really essentially, and this is the stock take relative to the 2015 seminal COP. Can't do the arithmetic to figure out which one that was, but the language is stopping short of a phase out of fossil fuels, talking about an equitable and just transition from fossil fuels. And we also got the things like the tripling of renewables. I guess a successful outcome is when nobody's happy.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the definition of this, but there's just a lot of non-specific language left to interpretation. And so just wanted to button that up in terms of what actually was the closing note of COP28. So
you feel like that's just generally speaking, do you feel like it's almost like they've taken their foot off the pedal a little bit because they didn't explicitly define it? Or do you think that this is still kind of in that same Like, do you think people are pulling back a little bit after the last couple years on this speed to transition mentality?
I think as we summarized with Dan Pickering's tweet last week, everybody just goes back and, not much changes. Mm-hmm. So if you look at what is happening in political outcomes here recently, I do think that there is some merit to the notion that, at least in the West, certain election outcomes and the prospect of more of the same, meaning moving a little more slowly, mm-hmm. or maybe walking back some of the accelerated timeline, if not outright undoing some of the transition mandates and policies. I do think that there is an element of that. I think Al Jaber had to, I don't know if save a little face is the right term, but they needed to come out with something consequential, mm-hmm. and explicit as it relates to fossil fuels. But you and I both know, and maybe it's cynicism, maybe it's reality, or a combination of both, and those two usually intersect. There's a lot of maneuverability.
I mean, the reality is this. I think people are starving, and people are in massive debt. I mean, today it just broke that British consumer energy debt hits a record £3 billion. Like, British consumers can't.
That's consumer
debt. Yeah. They cannot crazy. Afford their bills, their energy bills at home. And why is that? Because the UK has been on this massive tear to build out renewables at the expense of cost. And people are saying, wait, I can't afford it. So it's actually the utilities, the retailers holding all this debt because people can't pay. And that's happening around the world. Yeah. So I'm like, at the end of the day, something's got to go. Do I want clean versus I want to be able to have food on the table? People are going to pick food every single time.
And they have.
And they are.
Well, it compounds too, right? Like, everyone thinks about inflation around, groceries and your average stuff. But then it's like, hey, but then the materials for the house that you're trying to build go up, and the cost to transport all of those things go, like, everything is affected at the root of it pretty much by the cost of energy at the whole, right? Like, because you've got to move the stuff from A to B. You've got to move the materials. You've got to move all the groceries. And all
I was at an appointment this morning. I was asking one of the nurses about, what are you doing for Christmas? Have you done your shopping? And two nurses both said, one said, well, my Christmas presents this year is me. Like, I'm not buying presents. Mm-hmm. And another one's like, man, we were trying not to do a big Christmas this year. But the overall tone was pretty bleak. People aren't feeling great about the economy. We all know it. So who cares about COP28 right now?
Yeah.
I think, the environmentalists are going to have to take a back seat, and they are, because there's too much momentum against them right now.
So I think the acceleration side of this whole gathering, the other part of the agreement, or the other agreement coming out that was heralded, was a tripling of renewables and all that entails.
China signed that one too. I'm very curious, as they have all their nuclear plants nuke and coal plants being built.
There was a thread, and we'll post it, that was actually reposted. Really, the only reason I don't follow this person who tweeted it, but was talking about not only what it means to replace 61% of electric power that is fossil fuel related, but what about the installed base of renewables today, wind and solar? And if you put 25 and 30-year lives on those respectively, wind 25, solar 30, then by 2050, a significant chunk, if not the majority, close to all of it, under those assumptions, in the current renewable segment will have to undergo replacement. And then tripling on top of that implies just to replace hydrocarbons, So the 61%. So I'm
Mhm.
maybe back and forth between tripling and I guess that would effectively be a tripling
Right.
to get to that 61% of the electricity pie. The estimate is at current manufacturing capacity and supply chain situation, it would take 67 years of manufacturing.
I mean, I think, when you put all the sort of dots together, and COVID drove this in a massive way. You see large corporations moving from very expensive states with very expensive energy to very cheap states with very inexpensive energy. I don't think this is going to last. I mean, you just can't artificially promote a business. At some point, if it doesn't make money, people are going to say, wait a minute, this just doesn't make sense. And that's what I think we're seeing is there is a place for renewables. It's happening, but it's not going to happen at this pace and the speed that everyone wants it to happen because it just doesn't make any economic sense.
So this goes to the kind of the fundamental, what do they want? Is it actually a reduction of emissions or an elimination of fossil fuels?
Yeah.
Is it renewables defined as wind and solar because they're low carbon, or is it low carbon?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I personally think we've talked about this before as well. I think this just is going to be a growing catalyst that really starts to move nuclear forward.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I was talking to Ryan Rice actually the other day, and we were talking about it, and I was like saying something to the effect of, until, they realize that nuclear is the best option. It's cheaper. It's way safer than anyone actually thinks it is. And it's been around for decades. And if we wanted to actually do that, nuclear makes a ton of sense. But nobody, everyone thinks worst case scenario in nuclear, even though that has literally like the worst possible case scenarios recently, at least closer to the States, weren't like, there were no deaths. There were no individuals that died from Fukushima. And it was a natural disaster that they designed for, and it still didn't, blow up.
And Japan is scrambling to restart a bunch of nuclear.
Right.
Why? Because it's getting
cheap baseload energy.
Yeah.
Well, they're heavily dependent
on
gas imports from Russia.
Yeah.
There was a good piece out on Doomberg recently talking about, this notion of, how do you hurt? It was a little along those lines is the way I read it. How do you hurt a bad actor like Russia? You don't impair the market or constrict the market. You allow the market to flood with those commodities, because what the Russians depend on more than anything right now for their economic well-being, and things are actually pretty good domestically in Russia. They're generating a lot more revenue because prices are relatively elevated. Whereas, if the Saudis flooded the market, OPEC didn't have its discipline, then we're looking at crude prices that are much lower.
Well, I think we're passing around a couple articles that we've been talking about. We're going to wait for Chuck and maybe Frack Slack to talk through it in detail. It's not only supply from other places, but if Russia gets these pipelines built to get more into Europe, there could be some serious issues in terms of just the global power dominance changes.
Yeah.
And Russia has the capability. I know the U.S., we've been against it for a long time, because once Russia gets pipelines, our LNG business in Europe is going to dry up. We have less influence. We're on a really interesting sort of political / energy path that we need to probably unpack more.
We in the U.S. and more broadly in North America have the gas potential to really, really play geopolitical strategic offense and be the supplier of choice that displaces.
But we're not doing that.
Right. That's the fear, I think, that's driving a lot of the pseudo-NATO or NATO adjacent, kind of the buffer between Russia and the NATO states is, do we allow the resumption or traversing of new natural gas supplies in the Arctic LNG on the Siberian coast in Russia, do we allow those things to essentially come out and take market share?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so,
I mean, even with all the, policies in place to block Russian oil and stuff, right? You look at what they've kind of done, right? Like, so ironically, their output to Azerbaijan went up and Azerbaijan's output went up, but Russia isn't smuggling their resources through Baku, and they find ways to get it on the market. They have people who are willing to do that.
Look to Switzerland for that.
Yeah, right.
Follow the money.
If there's anything that's close to permanently cheap, and I borrowed that term from the late great Steve Chazen, who said years ago at a conference in a kickoff as to why he was still running Oxy at the time, as to why Oxy was so bullish on Gulf Coast petchem. And Steve, in his usual kind of dry genius, said, we just love permanently cheap natural gas.
No doubt.
Yeah. It is something that provides, I think, unparalleled energy density at value. Now that we've gotten most of the transport,
right?
It's still not as easy to transport as coal or fuel oil and crude oil, but you essentially have half the CO2 signature of coal, all things equal. And the track record that we've achieved over the last 15 to 20 years, I know EQT talks a lot about this, is the replacement and retirement of coal in favor of natural gas. That substitution has made a real absolute impact.
Yeah, that's the crazy part, is you can clearly look at, the CO2 emissions from the U.S. over the years. You can look at it right on top of natural gas production, oil production, and the GDP too, because that's another thing, right? Like, emissions can go down if the GDP goes down because the economy isn't growing and people aren't doing as much.
Which happened during COVID.
But we did that, like, the economy grew over the last 10, 20 years very, heartily, and generally speaking, energy prices were relatively low here in the US, and we reduced our carbon emissions because we moved away from coal. It's like how the power of that is still not talked about, in my opinion, a lot nationally or internationally, because they don't want that narrative to get out. Right.
And I think uniquely, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn from an understanding geologically or from a reservoir standpoint, but just putting some numbers out there, the world is at 377 BCF a day. The U.S. produces over 100 now. 17 BCF a day that comes from the Permian in the form of associated gas.
Yeah, associated gas.
Which is
associated.
Which is literally free.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Or a byproduct.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is not a quiver full of arrows, I'm not sure what is.
Yeah.
I think once the U.S. realizes that only oil and gas can produce pickleball equipment, that's going to change everything.
I mean, I do think genuinely, though, like, and we've seen it here, in Houston even, but you start, forcing, one, higher energy costs on people, and then two, less reliability. And we have another winter like that again, like, people are going to lose their shit. And that's not just, in Texas, we can blame ERCOT, right? Because we have that.
Literally.
But outside of Texas, when you're on the national grid and stuff, like, when that starts happening more and more in areas that hasn't happened to in the past, right?
Like,
like,
we see it in California.
That's going to be
it's happening.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay on the Miso Island.
The
southern part of Miso is still.
I mean, there's a lot of talk about balkanization. It's happening, but it's just happening in its organic way.
Yeah. But I mean, the fastest way to get people off of that mindset is for them to have to go through
hardcore.
Yeah. Go through a few days without
power. You tend
power
to reflect on those things when you go to the ballot box too, standing there by yourself in the quiet.
True.
All right, Kirk.
I mean, news not as interesting for me. Octopus Energy just raised $800 million. Who's Octopus? Some of you in Texas might actually have Octopus Energy as your retailer. They're a British-based retailer. They're actually, 10 years old. They're very young. But they solved a problem that I've been talking about. They created a software, it's called Kraken, that is an integrated, modern software package. Now, Octopus is the second largest retailer in the UK, but they've had an interesting strategy. They've been actually raising equity from other retailers. They came to Shell. We looked at the deal, but their whole idea is quid pro quo. I'm going to license you Kraken. You use my software. You give us some equity to help us grow. They're now about an $8 billion company. They have the Japanese, they have the Canadians, they have a lot of money, but they have global money, and they're in I don't know, 3 or 4 countries in Europe. They're in the US now. They bought a small retailer in Austin, and now it's called Octopus Energy here in Texas. But there's someone to watch out for, because if there's a model of sort of trying to make retail electricity actually profitable, the only real way to do it is to drop the cost down to almost zero. And to do that, you need software that's actually really good at analyzing where to get your energy, trading and making the right hedges, and then being able to help your customers hedge and use energy effectively and wisely. Cut power when there's maybe events, etc. But I'm pretty bullish on Octopus. Interesting that they raised more money. They're just sort of taking over the world.
Yeah.
In a market that almost most retailers don't know how to play.
Yeah. No, I mean, that infrastructure grid side, I feel like, is one of those areas too, where there's just so much opportunity for disruption, especially around like connected and distributed loads and all of that stuff. Because, there was, I know Colin had talked about it a bunch, but like Griddy was a retailer here where you could buy wholesale every 15 minutes, right? And whether people realize that or not, and the implications of that or not, is one thing. But the idea of that, like, you have the Bitcoin miners on the grid that get paid to turn off and allow people to redirect their baseload. Well, my Honeywell app asks me when ERCOT's putting out their stuff, hey, do you want to sign up for the program where they can control when I get my stuff bumped up or down? It's like, well, give me some incentive for me to let you do that, right? Like, am I going to get a discount? Am I going to get, a discount on my rate? Am I going to get quoted, the amount that I didn't use back to me and added to my bill so that I get some kind of net benefit to that? Otherwise, no one is going to do that, right? And so, like, there's so many things like that where it's like the simplicity of just having, understanding user behavior and incentives, and having the technology to bring along with that, and saying like, hey guys, we now have this whole thing set up, and we'll also pay you, the consumer, X cents per kilowatt hour that you don't use during this time period, or something. My
retail startup was called, and we didn't actually raise the money we needed, was called Blackbeard. And it wasn't stealing from it wasn't the idea of like stealing. It was Blackbeard more than Robinhood, but the idea was really like, let's take from the grid and distribute it in a more equitable way, but in a capitalistic way.
Yeah.
The thing about Go Gritty that I always struggled with was they were putting the risk. They actually gave you the risk as the consumer, and that's where I was like, that model just doesn't work in a market like ERCOT. That's now New Zealand. There's a company that, and I'm blanking on the name. They actually did the same thing as Gritty. They were the model, and they worked, but they worked in a small market where they have hydropower there's sort of no, $12,000 a megawatt hour,
not the volatility
in New Zealand. But it's interesting. I think Octopus is someone to watch. I don't know what their prices are, but interesting development. What else we got in the world?
We have a revisit of the Venezuela Guyana issue, mainly for the sake of corrections, and thank you to our subject matter expert for pointing out some mistakes that we made.
Our listeners.
I mean,
thank you.
Fundamentally, this is a person who has a lot of expertise in the area and a lot of historical knowledge. And I think I misspoke and said that the dispute was originally in the 1800s between the Venezuelans and the French, but Guyana was a British territory, British Guyana. Venezuela gained its independence in 1830. which set up the British commissioning a German naturalist to establish the borders, and basically the outcome of that was to establish the western border of British Guyana at that time as the Orinoco River on the eastern border of what is today Venezuela. The territory between, and Venezuela protested that, the territory between the Orinoco River on the west and the Essequibo River, which really runs through the eastern, kind of divides the eastern third of present-day Guyana, was under agreement not to be colonized by either the British or Venezuela. Gold was discovered there later on. The Monroe Doctrine was invoked, and then you have an enforcement of the western boundary of British Guyana as the Orinoco River. Well, now we've got a significant parallel to that going on with discovery in what would be territorial waters of the disputed area, according to Venezuela, in the form of the Stabroek Block and then the other discoveries that have been made. A lot of different theories and opinions out there on who lines up with whom, but Chevron is now in the Stabroek Block. They've had a long history with the heavy oil development and the benefits of all that. With respect to Venezuela, how that plays out in terms of political dynamics, I think more recently parties are on record saying we don't want military action. We don't, we want to resolve this diplomatically. Don't know where Suriname stands, because I think, in one piece that I saw out there, I forget what the source was, conjecturing that maybe they have something to gain even more if they ally with the side of the Venezuelans. I'm not saying that that's what they have done. It's just, it's a fairly, an increasingly complex issue, but just wanted to clarify some of those particularly historical errors that I made on the last show.
Well, and finally, I've been listening to a podcast, I'm not finished with it, by David Blackman. He interviewed Megan Lapp, fisheries liaison for Seafree Shoreside. They are a fishing company, mainly off Atlantic, some Gulf of Mexico, and really about the lawsuits that they're suing both on the federal and state level about all these wind farms that have been green lighted by the Biden administration. What's interesting is for over 40 years, NOAA, which sort of manages the leases, has said seismic surveying is way too difficult on marine life. And I've seen a few, which is kind of amazing, in Nantucket, but the North Atlantic right whale is endangered, and the Endangered Species Act sort of trumps everything. But didn't realize this, that seismic surveying temporarily deafens whales. Construction permanently can deafen whales. And so that's why oil and gas has had, you can't do any surveying off North Atlantic. It's been 40 years, but now they're sort of green lighting.
Now they're out there surveying for
what's
wind
the
farms.
difference between the impact of, why is seismic temporary and construction causing
I don't know, but actually the surveying for wind, just to be clear, the surveying for wind is actually not as harmful as for oil and gas. I think the charges aren't as big, maybe.
You're probably trying to map subsurface for more subsurface for oil and gas than
that's
for wind.
Correct. But what's interesting is
it's depth.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the podcast is interesting because it goes on to quite a few issues. But one is if you work for the federal government that oversees these leases, you have a history of getting good jobs with the wind companies. But secondly, is they're pretty much ignoring. They're doing seismic surveys anyway, because the federal government says you can, and they're ignoring the fact that they have these sort of rules around, if there's a whale in the vicinity, you can't be surveying or you can't do construction. But the way to find the whales, they have sightseers, and they're like, we'll look an hour a day. And right whales are actually pretty quiet. You don't so they're not very communicative. So you have to be surveying 24 hours a day with subsonic sound systems, and you can pick them up, but they're choosing not to do that. And that's why we've seen a lot of these whales, show up on the shores dead, because it's killing these whales. But it's interesting because it further goes. There's been some debate. We've talked about this before on the show about how these whales are dying, and people are saying, wait, it's not the wind farms. We know it's not. And according to Megan on this podcast, she is saying that a lot of the people in charge of running these studies for the government have actually been hired by the wind industry. So they somehow the study results come out in favor of course, it has nothing to do with wind, but it's interesting development.
Taking a play out of the big pharma playbook. It's like, oh, hey, you do this for us, then you can come get a job for us after the fact.
And that happens in oil and gas. I mean, there's quite a few
everywhere.
oil and gas engineers that have gone to the Railroad Commission, but not at the same level. So we're not seeing this level of, cronyism.
I mean, could you imagine if it was an oil and gas company though that was not
today? No way.
Yeah, like and then the irony of all of it too is, Chuck's got his big spiel on how whales are huge carbon sinks and we need more whales, and so it's like
we need more
the
whales.
Irony of renewables killing whales that is also now.
She also said there's like one right whale in like the Gulf of Mexico. Like the Gulf of Mexico has very few whales, and I didn't realize that. Marine mammals. Thank you. But the North Atlantic's like the super highway.
Yeah,
they're everywhere, and we're killing them all. And I care about that
for wind. That's the best.
It's too bad for wind.
As a lover of the ocean and ocean activities,
as a surfer, I love the ocean, and I don't want to see big, ceiling fans that are creepy. You ever been in West Texas and seen all those wind farms? It is scary.
Look, I drove around Germany, France, and Holland this summer, and it just
you feel good though.
I hadn't driven around that part of the world in 20 plus years, and now seeing that everywhere in the countryside, and just the sight lines as you're driving, it's just it kind of jars you a little bit when you first see it.
Yeah, every time we drive by them, I make sure to take pictures of all the oil leaking down from the nacelles, because it's guaranteed find on every single one. And you're like, hey guys, if you're so green, I've got one that I'll throw in here that caught EFT's attention this weekend. But the Battalion Oil Corp announced on the 15th that it had plans to enter agreement to merge with Fury Resources. It's, I think, 100% stock merger, $450 million in value. But the part that really made everybody really excited was by offering the ability to drill locations with higher H2S volumes, this joint venture will allow the company to exploit additional drilling and acquisition opportunities which may not be available to others in the region. So I'm very curious, as an ex-Apache engineer, what your thoughts are on that statement out in West Texas.
On H2S, well, first of all, it was never an Apache engineer.
Your time at Apache, excuse me.
Yeah, I think H2S is going to continue to be kind of a niche oriented play, particularly with the levels of production in some of the mainstream areas that aren't as H2S heavy. You've got, I think, quite a bit of scrutiny already on just general things like water disposal, methane emissions, et cetera. And when we introduce more and more H2S into the equation, it becomes, I don't expect it to be a kind of a wave of a thing.
Yeah, me neither. I think
although there are technologies out there that have emerged that, allow on-site treating. I can't remember off the top of my head some of the things that we did see when I was evaluating technologies there. A couple of them were H2S related, because there were operators that were one-off that did have some H2S prone areas, and it made sense to try and do that effectively and efficiently on site from a cost perspective, and boost the economics of
right.
The more impurities and things that you have to deal with, the higher the break-even cost bar is.
Yeah, no, I thought that was funny to be in there, like, you know, an announcement in the merger and acquisition that was going to be one of their knobs that they were going to twist.
I think what's going to become more widespread in terms of bad things that come from underground, along with mining and extraction processes, is all the things that we're going to have to deal with this theoretical explosion in surface and pit mining that we're going to have to undertake. In addition to, and more importantly to that, some of the really nasty processes you have to undertake to get purity minerals and metals out of those, in some cases, decreasing ore quality type of things. So that's a subject for probably another show or
no, for sure.
a show unto itself. But we've talked about, you know, things like the nickel processing and refining in Indonesia, which is increasingly toward a process called HPAL, which is high pressure acid leaching, which introduces sulfuric acid under high temperatures and pressures, which then require a lot more energy and thermal energy inputs. And, you know, a lot of what's being built to support that process, or that increase in the proportion of HPAL in the processes of nickel refining, is coal-fired generation. So,
yeah, I think it's, you know, most people would see H2S as like a negative thing, and it costs more money because all your pipe has to be special and you have to treat it. And then it's also, you have to have people under oxygen in most of those situations, and like it's just dangerous all around. And so finding that in the merger and acquisition announcement as their differentiator, EFT had a fun field day with that. I'm sure.
My first job, real job offshore, I was when rig count went to near zero, and the green hand got to do night company man duty. We were drilling in I think it was main pass area that was H2S prone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had all the monitors, alarms, drills, et cetera. And the senior guy that was out there with me decided to let me eat breakfast after I came off. You know, it was a luxury to have two company men on a rig, because you could actually split it up into 12-hour shifts. Otherwise, you're out there for 24/7. You don't know when you're going to sleep. And I was, whatever the deepest part of sleep is, he decided to hold a drill. And I come scrambling out with Nomex, kind of half on, half off, got my Scott Air Pack on. We all go to the muster point, and we have a workboat tied up. This is jackup. We have a workboat tied up, and all the workboats that we're servicing, all the workboats and crew boats that service those rigs, had those cascade units with the air bottles strapped onto the deck, and everybody had hoses and masks that they were supposed to. You could hear the alarms way down on the surface of the sea or the Gulf. They were tied up and they were fishing. None of them had their mask on. Oh, we thought it was a drill.
Yeah.
Okay. H2S goes to the bottom. It sinks.
Yep. It's heavy.
Well, what are y'all doing for Christmas, boys?
Go first.
A little trip to Scottsdale.
Oh yeah. Awesome.
Nice and be good weather out there, huh?
I hope so.
It's true.
No, it should be good. How about you?
I mean, I think I'm going to pick a fine bourbon, sip it during the holidays. As kids come in, maybe play a little golf.
I was going to
drink some good wine.
Golf's going to be pretty good this next couple weeks.
Good
a
weather.
little hunting as well, but that's after
in
Christmas.
Scottsdale.
No,
the only hunting in Scottsdale
back here in
is
Texas.
For
mountain lions.
is for ex-wives, but hopefully you're not doing that.
Mountain lions.
Got it.
We're doing Christmas Eve here with my side of the family, and then leaving the day after Christmas to go up to Shreveport to spend it with hers. So
I was talking. So one of the nurses I was talking to this morning said, she's like, I'm one of the few people that I tell people I don't like the food in Houston, and she's like, people get so mad at me. I'm like, then you must be from like South Louisiana. She's like, I am from Baton Rouge, but a small town so far south you wouldn't even be able to pronounce it.
Houston is vastly underrated.
I was like, she's like, I love the Tex-Mex, love the barbecue, but is there a good Cajun restaurant in Houston?
Ooh,
I mean, she nailed it. I was
that's
like,
a pretty good
boom.
question.
Good point.
That's a pretty good point.
If you're a listener out there, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy belated Hanukkah.
Happy belated Hanukkah. We will be off.
We might be off, but if we decide to throw an audible, if something big happens, like the Horns win the national championship, like they should, we might have to come back and just talk about it. But
That's not until January the 8th.
Yeah, you'll be back.
we'll be back
We'll be
anyway.
back.
That's a good point.
But you'll have one CFP.
Now, you might have to be on the 1st if you're ambulatory after the game on the 31st if they win to handicap
That's true.
the
Which is in
national
New
championship.
Orleans, nonetheless.
Oh, we have to give another closing shout out to Frack Slap. Tomorrow's his birthday.
So everyone on Twitter,
Yeah, go blow them up tomorrow.
go blow
I guess
them up.
today when this comes out.
Please
Did
like
the fundraise
subscribe.
closing giveaway. Saw
Yeah.
that announcement to
Yes.
Digital Wildcatters on Twitter were selected. So
Fantastic. All right,
That's
guys.
a good way to cap it off. Somebody's getting an extra Merry Christmas from that. So
That's right.
thanks for stepping in, John.
absolutely, man. Anytime.
Always welcome on this
Makes
show.
us a lot smarter.
That's right.
It's a lie.
Definitely a lot younger.
Cheers, everybody.
Appreciate it, guys.
Cheers. Have a
Later.
You'll have
good
a good
holiday
one.
season.